Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Another day, another dollar. Going through the week here, going and looking at the forecast into this weekend. We do have some weather on the way. This is a diagram for the Storm Prediction Center on the slight risk that's going across Iowa. And what is happening here is kind of a unique situation as this low pressure system moves in, kind of that Lee cyclone kind of land cyclone thing going on. And when it does pass into this region, actually, what is happening here, we got some veering winds that's going through here, as well as 50s dew points that are ejecting into the north, into the northeast off the dry line. So once they get into this area here, it's going to make for a little bit of a moist atmosphere. And what is happening with the instability? Because I know in the last video yesterday we were getting a very confusing look at the models because we were still about one day out before we really get a good look at what's going on, and there was still a lot of unpredictability in the GFS with this. And the reason for that actually is because it has a very narrow, this area here through this storm has a very narrow kind of passage of instability. All right, so around the low is where most of that instability is going to be, right pretty much on that low pressure system, and then kind of broader out, spreading out away from the low pressure system ahead or behind it in any case like that, but more towards the warm front. It's going to be a little bit of periodic kind of places of instability, but the rest of it is going to hold together pretty nicely. So we're not getting broken caps all across the storm, which is good. That's a limiting factor. So what we're getting is kind of individual and isolated places where that capping is broken and where that instability is a little bit narrow and not very broad in some of these areas and these aspects here, you know what I mean? In some cases, this instability can reach over 500 joules of CAPE in some of these areas here, and that's not good because we could have an isolated tornado threat out of that. But I would say the primary threat through this is going to be hailmakers, and it's going to be damaging winds. Hailmakers and damaging wind, torrential rainfall is likely, and some flooding definitely possible. So this region here, and pretty much half of the state of Missouri, you could get some hailmakers through this, damaging wind gusts. We saw that in those models yesterday when we looked at them. We saw some of the wind profiles, and those wind profiles are steep, I'm not going to lie. With some of those veering winds coming off of the front there from the west and the northwest right here, you got some veering winds, and you got those dew points that are kind of kind of pluming off of the dry line there, so that's making kind of an unstable environment in some places. All right, so we're going to check out the models today and see what we can see as far as what is going on here. Let's check out the NAM model, and the NAM model should bring us up to looks like the 6th. All right, so we get about 3 days on this. We might be able to see this event particularly through okay, so we're not actually up to that point. So Missouri, I do know that your hailmakers and your damaging wind gusts and your weather kind of rich areas is supposed to come around the evening time of that period. All right, so let's get to the point when we see that low move in, and you can see it here. Kind of there's that weather that's kind of moving up into Missouri here. Let's go back. Let me see the 4th here. Here we go. Let's start right from the beginning, okay? Because I think I jumped the gun a little bit there. You got some of those storms that are kind of building up into Iowa here, and then you start to see, but ahead of the storm, I mean, the instability is really not that bad. We do have some broken caps. We got some heat. We got some moisture in this area. We got definitely plenty enough wind field. Surface state kilometers, 68 knots, it looks like, in wind shear. But look at our dew points. We're already in the 50s. So that's that plume of kind of moisture and instability that's kind of moving up into the area off of the dry line. And as that low approaches, getting through parts of Kansas and Nebraska, up into Iowa, not a whole lot of instability, but we're jumping up a little bit. Most unstable CAPE around 338. We do have some breaks in the caps, but it's not as much of a break as in the last hydrograph that we just looked at here. We do have some heat and moisture in there. Dew points around 55. We got, look at the winds. Surface state kilometers, 78 knots, 67 surface 6 kilometers in the atmosphere. So we definitely have some wind shear down at the bottom. All right, so damaging wind gusts are likely all across this area, and that was actually over the border right here in Nebraska. So Nebraska, you could get some windy days there too. Kind of moving through the area here. So all right, so but now like look at what's happening here. You get that kind of narrow plume of instability, and then in some places, or that narrow kind of corridor of instability, but we're not really getting it here. You know what I mean? So 106, that instability is not that bad, and it looks like the cap is coming together again. So in some places the cap is really great, and then in some places the cap is not that great. Where we see it here, caps are broken, a little bit of heat and moisture up there around 3 kilometers. Got wind fields 78 to 62, serve as the 6 to 8 kilometers in the atmosphere. Got steep wind profiles. 56 is the dew points there. That's that increase in moisture that we're seeing. And then breaking across Iowa, where you can see some of those cells building up. 553, most unstable cape. It's not really registering a threat here, but there is a minor threat here. It'll be a low end tornado threat if it is a tornado threat at all. I would say it's more of a marginal severe threat, to be honest with you, because it looks like it's going to be damaging winds, possibly some hail makers and torrential rainfall, some thunder and lightning, and an isolated, I would say an isolated tornado threat across this area. I don't think that this is going to be a widespread or damaging tornado kind of threat. Around the low, closer, if we get closer to the low pressure system, then you start to see that instability rise a little bit. All right, so it says most unstable cape around 1,000. That's probably going to be the areas where you're going to have the possibility for some isolated tornadoes. All right, so it is a low end tornado threat, but it isn't a zero tornado threat. All right, so we got a big break in the caps there. We got plenty of heat and moisture and wind shear in this area in order to get some supercells spinning up. You can see the supercell development around 4.2. All right, so we have all the accoutrement and all the ingredients, excuse me, in this area for some tornadoes to roll out right basically at the base of the low pressure system. Even though it says marginal severe here, this is just one spot. But look, 694 and most unstable cape. We're getting wind shear. We got a nice break in the caps. We got, stable wind field, plenty of wind shear. 40s to 50 knots in wind shear. We got hooking in the hydrograph. So around the low pressure system, all those all those ingredients are in place. So we're looking around the 5th, the evening of the 5th, these pre-storms are going to kind of roll through. Could get some severe thunderstorms in here and possibly some hard rain going through there as well. The wind shear is going to be a factor because when you look at where my mouse is right here, between here and the low pressure system, there is going to be a warm front. Okay, so the warm front ahead of the low pressure system, once that passes, in between that warm front and the low pressure system itself, there's going to be a cold front back here as well. All right, that's going to be trailing with the storms. Okay, and in between here, this is where your wind shear is going to be the worst. This is where that damaging wind threat is going to happen. So anytime you have that warm front moving across, and it's going to be, that warm front's going to be moving off to the east and northeast behind that warm front, those winds are going to pick up a little bit. They're going to be a couple notches harder. So that's where your damaging wind threat is at. You could get some of those steep wind shear. Right now, it looks like in most hydrographs and most soundings that I've looked at, it's about 70 to 75 knots, somewhere around there is possible, and some of the damaging wind gusts that are going to be possible in that area, behind the warm front especially. All right, and then as the low pressure system moves in the overnight hours of the 5th into the 6th, it looks like here, all right, then we start to see that instability moving into that area with that low pressure system in Missouri. So we have a marginal tornado threat in northern Missouri with that broken cap, plenty of heat and moisture in this area, dew points around the 50s. We got plenty of wind shear here. Look at the wind profiles in Missouri. I hate to say it, down on the southern end, you're getting higher wind profiles than what I'm seeing in Iowa. So that damaging wind threat is probably going to be more likely in Missouri than it is in Iowa. It just seems like we're getting steeper wind shear. You know what I mean? So damaging wind gusts all across Iowa and Missouri. But we're going to look at Kansas as well as this is kind of rolling through. But you know what I mean? With some of the damage, with some of the wind threat, with some of the wind shear moving into this area, it looks like a really, really big contributing factor to some of that possibly damaging winds. Now going into the Ohio Valley, that severe level is going to drop off quite a bit, but we still are not out of the woods yet with wind. Look at surface to 8 kilometer wind field, 72 knots. All right, so the severe threat is gone, and this storm is kind of breaking up and losing its organization, but we still have a broken cap, so some rain showers and storms are still possible, and we have some wind on the surface there, and that wind could be damaging at times. Even going across up into the northern states, we're going across Wisconsin here with some of those bigger storms, those bigger thunderstorms, and they're general thunderstorms. They're not. There's no instability with them, no severe threat with them, or anything like that. But look at our wind shear. 70 knots surface to 8 kilometers. So we're getting pretty steep wind shear in a lot of these areas here. Damaging wind threat is possible through all of these regions, but primarily around this low pressure system is where our tornado threat is at. And moving across to Iowa, there you see in some places where that instability shifts. In some places it's lower, in some places it's higher. I just clicked this sounding up here. Let's click it right down here in southern Iowa, south of the low. Now you see that marginal tornado threat, which I've told you with most. I've mentioned in other videos that in most storm systems and more storm structures, that kind of weaker part of the storm is up towards the north, where you're getting kind of that broad, widespread rain showers. All right, and that's very common. And then down towards the south of that storm structure right there is where it gets a little bit more narrow. It gets tighter, more isolated, and also that's where you're getting most of your wind shear coming in with the downdraft, the inflow, and the updraft over here from the southwest or from the southeast. This is where you're getting this. So that the southern portion of these storm structures is usually the portion that creates supercells, tornadoes, you know what I mean? Some isolated spin ups and everything like that. So that kind of southern portion south of the low is probably going to be a little bit more dangerous and more potential of tornadoes than the northern portion is. It doesn't bring Iowa out of the threat because anywhere around this low, you could have that. There we go. You could have that marginal tornado threat. But that low pressure system is going to be the irritant pretty much throughout this entire storm. That low pressure system eventually moves out of that area, going up into the northeastern states, primarily Wisconsin, and then that threat drops off. And we still have some damaging wind threat possible because we have some steep wind shear that's still going on in this area. That the dew points are going to start to drop off a little bit as this gets into a more drier atmosphere. You can see most of this turning up into winter weather that's going up in here and then moving out and getting its way into Canada. All right, and then after that, then we still have this kind of segment of storms moving across the Ohio Valley. Not really looking at a whole lot of severe potential with these, but some of these thunderstorms could be on the stronger side, and we do have some significant wind shear in this area. So definitely batten down the hatches on some loose items in the yard or anything like that that you got outside that might blow around as a result of some of this wind. Cap is broken all the way through this thing, so basically traditional thunderstorms is going to be really likely in this area going across the Ohio Valley. All right, and that's going into the early morning hours of the 6th. All right, and then the southern regions going into Kentucky. Then we have those storms continuing on as well to the south. Look at our wind shear profiles down here: 72 knots surface to 8 kilometers, and dew points around the 60s. All right, so not a whole lot of severe potential with that, but we do have some damaging wind gusts that are still possible. This portion of the storm up here to the north, moving into the northeast. The northeast is probably going to have that warm front ahead of it too, so it's going to be a little bit on the warmer side. Some rain showers definitely possible, and then cold followed after these storms move in out of this area, and then that cold kind of moves into the country and is said to actually reach a kind of a crisp cold sector going all the way down into the Gulf states. So after these storms move out to the east, then we get into our next portion of the storms, which might not be much of a clear view right now because we're going into the storms on the 7th, the overnight 6th. Okay, evening hours, we start to see these storms popping up here. This is where we get into our next convection system that's moving into the 7th, going over Arkansas and primarily probably some of southern Missouri as well as Oklahoma. All right, so we're going to go over that as well. Okay, let's look at some of these storms that are building up into Oklahoma here. All right, the GFS should get a little bit more of a clear picture. All right, so this is the kind of prefrontal system kind of developing here. We got a little bit of disturbances in the wind field here. And our wind profile is around 86 surface day kilometers. We're getting a lot of wind shear in this area. And our most unstable cape is on the rise. So we are getting into that zone here where these storms are starting to ramp up. They're starting to organize. They're kind of just, trying to get there a little bit. Marginal severe risk with some of these storms that are going across Oklahoma. So you could get some thunderstorms that are on a little bit of the stronger end going into eastern Oklahoma. It still seems like we got a lot of discrepancies in the wind field here, especially on the surface, but our wind shear is very, very steep. We have a really nice wind shear going into this area. Then you start to see these building general thunderstorms moving into Missouri. All right, where there's not a whole lot of threat, a lot of discrepancies in the wind field, but we do have some very, very steep wind profiles. Damaging wind gusts are likely and possible going into Missouri, a part of these storms. So you could get that second round of possibly damaging wind gusts. I hate to say it. On the southern border of Missouri, still not a whole lot of threat, but our wind shear it isn't as bad, but it isn't definitely isn't down enough to really take away that damaging wind possibility. All right, we're still looking around 65 to 70 knots wind shear in southern Missouri. Now, going to the Oklahoma line as this kind of starts to move into Arkansas, then we start to see some of that instability on the rise. 496 in most unstable cape is per the GFS, and 77 it looks like surface day kilometers in our wind fields. Our dew points already reaching around the 60s. Supercell composite around 3.3. So we definitely do have some supercell potential moving into Arkansas. That low pressure system moves in. Like I said, low pressure systems are usually the biggest irritant of these storms, and it will be with some of those popping up isolated cells that are moving into the area. Marginal severe risk with this, but in some sections you could have that higher end, a little bit marginal tornado risk, where some isolated tornadoes could be possible across this area. Now, it doesn't look too bad. This instability in this area doesn't look horrible. You know what I mean? And now we get this low pressure system that is still moving up. We get kind of like a second round of this moving up from Mexico. So it's kind of bringing up a little bit more heat, a little bit more moisture. And as what I've seen with the as what I have seen with the from what I've looked at anyways, with the theta E advection, there is theta E advection in this area that kind of moves like this. You know what I mean? It kind of sweeps into Texas from over the Gulf, and then with that cold front here, that cold front kind of shifts it to the east. It kind of blows it to the east. So the whole thing just kind of moves like this and then curves, and that theta E advection is just kind of flushing that heat and moisture into this area, and that's going to kind of loosen up. It's gonna loosen things up to make a more unstable atmosphere in these areas around this low pressure system, and that's what this really does. So that tornado threat kind of jumps up a little bit because you see that heat and that moisture moving up in there. Our dew points around the 60s in this area, which in most cases with this theta E advection kind of increasing as it moves to the east, those dew points are actually going to be on the rise from the 60s, anywhere from that to the mid 60s, and possibly up closer to the 70s in some regions. So we could have some steep dew points in this area moving around this low pressure system as it gets into Arkansas, where that tornado threat is going to jump up a little bit because that theta E advection is going to irritate everything. All right, so it's just going to make for a really perfect environment for supercells to develop, for possibly some tornadoes across the majority of the state of Arkansas. Further to the north, where like I just said, in that storm structure, further to the north, you're getting more of that broad kind of thunderstorm development where that marginal severe risk is more likely. Could have some damaging winds and possibly some hail that is moving across this area. Hail makers are definitely possible. That wind shear is kind of disorganized a little bit further to the north, getting up towards Missouri. And really, the primary reason for that is, see where this is pinched here with that front right here? That front kind of pinches this together, and as it's pushing these storms, it's actually creating a lot of veering winds and straight line winds going into the Missouri region. into Oklahoma and Kansas, and then into that Missouri region around the line of Arkansas and Missouri. So you're getting these kind of broader storms here that are not really on the rise with some of their instability and severe potential and damaging wind gusts likely definitely in this area. Anywhere in this area where that pinch is kind of coming in, you're going to have some damaging wind gusts and straight line winds. But further down here, where we have a little bit more space between this and the cold front sitting here kind of behind the storms right here, pushing these storms to the east, that theta E advection with that southern flow that's coming into the low pressure system here, this is what's going to cause a lot of that rotation and a lot of that possible tornado threat that's going into this area right here. We have plenty of risk around right pretty much on this low pressure system moving into Arkansas. All right, so this is the seventh around the early morning to the midday hours, going into the afternoon hours. It's going to be kind of trailing across Arkansas throughout the day. It's going to last a little while. It's not going to. I mean, this is showing that it's not going to move out of the area very quickly. That could be different when we get to the day. All right. I mean, depending on how fast these storms are moving and shifting out of here northeast, sometimes these storms move anywhere from 32 miles an hour to 60 to 70 miles an hour. So, you know what I mean? Depending on what the wind shear is doing, is going to depend on how fast these storms move out of that area. Hopefully, it's one of those situations where the wind is really, really cranking up behind there and moving it out. I hate to say that because there is a more potential risk for damaging wind gusts, but those storms aren't going to linger around for long if it's moving that fast. And they're going to get in and get out of your area real quick, and that's a good thing. You know what I mean? We want to get them out real quick so we can get people to safety. In case of any damage or anything like that. And hopefully there won't be any tornadoes out of this. The tornado threat doesn't look very high, to be honest with you. It looks, it is a marginal tornado threat. It is a low end tornado threat, but it's not zero. It's definitely not zero. I can't rule it out. All right, so these move out of the area, that low pressure system, now moving into Tennessee, where we can get some of those, the western kind of tail of Tennessee right there. We can get some of those marginal severe risks that's going through there. 67 knots still in wind shear, surface to 8 kilometers. 60 and dew points are still possible in this area, very low on the supercell scale. So I'm not looking at the possibility really of supercells moving into this area. Let's see, the 7th around 21Z. Let's see what that low pressure system is irritating in Tennessee. Now we do have some tornado risk here. It looks like 744 most unstable Cape. The only reason for this is because we have steep wind shear. We have some instability right on that low pressure system. We have nice hooking in the hydrograph here. All right, and we have some supercell development that's possible. And the only reason for that is because it is directly right here on that low pressure system. We have storms developing right on it. All right, and anywhere around that low pressure system is where you're going to get a jump up in that supercell development and that instability and that tornado threat. So there is a tornado threat going into the very far western counties of Tennessee, it looks like, and in Kentucky, possibly on the northern end, but I think it's going to be a little bit more disorganized. Yeah, excuse me. So we're getting less wind shear, but we're still getting steep wind shear up in that area, stable wind field. Some severe risk with some of those storms that are developing in there, but that's further to the north there, so it's not going to be as severe, but damaging wind is possible, is likely going into that time frame here. I mean, just because, like I've told you guys before there, that kind of thin layer of green right here where it's very sharp, it's that nice sharp edge. Not seeing a whole lot of bowing structure in this, but the way how fine this edge is right here, you know what I mean? That kind of tells me that we got some straight line winds going in this area. Some damaging winds all across this storm, all the way up to the north right here, definitely possible. Just how fine that kind of green line is. It's very, very tight. It's very isolated. So straight line winds, damaging wind gusts anywhere along this is definitely a factor. I mean, that's reaching from Kentucky all the way up to possibly Pennsylvania in some areas where we could get some wind shear. Let's look at the wind shear up here in Pennsylvania. Just, because I'm curious. Look at this, 73, 79. You know what I mean? We're getting some steep wind, disorganized wind. No, no instability, no real severe threat. All right, but definitely a windy day with this whole storm moving across these areas, going into Western Virginia and Virginia, into the Carolinas. You're going to see some of that wind shear just kind of dragging across this area. All right, so some possibly stronger gusts across any of these areas is definitely likely. All right, so as this kind of continues on through Tennessee, all right, that threat kind of jumps down a little bit. Marginal tornado or marginal tornado risk around 500 is the most unstable cape, which is still possible for some isolated tornado threat. All right, that low pressure system is kind of moving northeast as the storm kind of continues on to the east here. It looks like Tennessee is going to be moving out of that severe threat, and we do have some marginal severe risk for some stronger thunderstorms. Further to the north, it looks like that instability is actually far less. So that kind of this is the time here where that theta E advection is weakening and it's actually receding back into the Gulf of Mexico, which is a good thing because these far northern states here around the low pressure system are going to start to back down in their severity here. All right, so some stronger thunderstorms is definitely still possible. Some damaging wind gusts, torrential rainfall, some flooding possible. I think that the hail threat is going to dwindle by this point, so I don't think a lot of hail is going to be possible, but some stronger and thunderstorms definitely a possibility. All right, so I know that a lot of people were kind of concerned about this, looking at Alabama, and because of Alabama's previous track record with tornadoes and its bad luck with weather, because of marginally that theta E advection moving into that area. So we're gonna check out Alabama here to see what kind of instability we're getting here. All right, so marginal tornado risk going into Alabama, just kind of on the border of Alabama as the storm moves in. Low end supercell threat, not really very high. It looks like at this point. Oh, excuse me. I had to get my coffee this morning, just waking up. All right, so we do have this line of storms that is now continuing on through Alabama. And for Alabama, this looks good, to be honest with you. It's a low end marginal tornado threat. It's a lot lower than what Alabama usually looks like, which is a good thing. It looks like all throughout Alabama, it's going to be marginal. It's going to be relatively sub-severe as far as their normal severe threat. An isolated brief spin-up tornado or two, it looks like could be possible across Alabama, at least at this point. Once we get into the later models, closer to the 7th and the 8th, this is going to be the 7th into the 8th in the morning hours, overnight hours. This is all the overnight hours. All right, so but I think there is some potential. It looks like on the GFS for some isolated tornado threat going across those western counties of Tennessee, and then of course Mississippi as well. We're going to look at Mississippi as this kind of comes out of Arkansas, just south of that low pressure system, where you see some of that significant hail and that tornado threat kind of lingering right there in around the low pressure system moving through Arkansas. Arkansas pretty much has the primary threat right now for some of that tornado risk moving into that area, and then also those far western counties of Tennessee. All right, those far western counties of Tennessee where that tornado threat kind of periodically jumps up a little bit, and that's probably because of its geographical location and in relation to where that theta E advection is kind of flushing into the country here from the Gulf states. All right, so once it hits that low pressure system, it's kind of collecting here. It's kind of mixing and it's collecting here because, like I said, you're gonna have a warm front and the cold front trailing behind this. So as it mixes in there, it's kind of jumping up the inflow a little bit. All right, and so that's the reason for the higher end tornado threat. Okay, so as this moves out of Arkansas, it gets into Mississippi now. So let's look at some of the atmospherics here in Mississippi, where that tornado threat does jump up a little bit, and it's mainly because of that theta E advection that I was telling you about. We're getting higher instability. We're getting dew points up over 60s now. Supercell development 4.8. All right, so and we got plenty of wind shear. We got 60 knots of wind shear surface to 8 kilometers. So plenty of wind shear in Mississippi right now for some damaging storms to roll out here. Looking a little bit further south, that is not it's not as high of a tornado threat as far as what it says here, but I think that this is going to be a little bit more steep than what is indicated here. Because it says marginal tornado risk, but honestly, we're looking at more instability here. We're looking at high dew points. We're looking at well, more than enough wind shear, and we still have some supercell development. It's not going to take a whole lot for some severe storms to roll out and produce some tornadoes. All right, so Arkansas into Mississippi. This is going to be your primary threat zone right here. When they do come out with the convection outlook, they're gonna put it right here. This is that zone right here. This is well, let me see here. Okay, hold on. I'm trying to kind of outline it here, but you know what I mean. This kind of zone right here going across northern Mississippi, pretty much like half of Mississippi and those western counties in Tennessee right here. This is where they're going to put that convection outlook. I guarantee it. Right in this area right here, and that's going to be the primary threat zone with that low pressure system moving in. All right, so as it continues on and gets through there, Alabama's not really looking too bad because I think that Theta E gets out of its pocket of instability. It's starting to weaken. It recedes back into the Gulf of Mexico, and then these storms continue on to the east, just as general thunderstorms once they get into North Georgia. North Georgia doesn't have a whole lot of threat there, just general thunderstorms, marginal severe threat possible. Um, just because of some of the wind profiles. We're looking at about 70 knots surface to kilometers in wind shear. So in North Georgia, you still could get some windy conditions here in Georgia, going into around the mid Georgia kind of area there. Not a whole lot of instability. Those winds are tapering down a little bit. They're not, they're still kind of still could have some gusty winds, but definitely lower. All right, and then the storm just kind of moves out to the Atlantic and eventually dissipates. For you all up into the northeast, as the as that low pressure system continues on up into Pennsylvania, you guys up here, it looks like it's going to be primarily rain for the most part and just general thunderstorm threat. Not really looking at a whole lot there, but look what happens afterwards. That low moves out. You got this cold front right here, and then behind it, chilly, chilly, chilly air. So with all that rain that you got, what's going to happen here is everything's going to freeze, and we're going to get some ice. So definitely in those northeastern states, be careful if you are on the move, because it is going to be icy. Then after these storms move out, dominated by high pressure after that, and our weather will be much more clear, but it'll be much more cold. You can see those cold temperatures reaching down into the country as far as the Gulf states, dominated by high pressure, but it's going to be chilly for a little bit. We get some of that chilly, chilly air. And then after that, we're going to be looking at our next systems coming in with the low pressure systems, and I'll continue that into another day. All right, but I just wanted to give you guys a heads up and a brief look at what is to come here. For the next couple days here, we're looking this weekend. So definitely have that plan in place. Have your family ready to be weather aware over the weekend, and I hope everybody stays safe. And thanks for watching, and I'll be making some more videos on this going towards the weekend. Just a little bit updated look, some more accurate data. Tomorrow we should be able to see the Iowa storms come in on some of the other models, the NAM model and possibly the HRR, as it's going to be day 2 instead of day 3 now. That's going to move the storms down in Arkansas into day 3, so the data should be a little bit different and more accurate. Once we get the other models, be able to see it on the NAM model and the HRR model, we should get some updated information and some more accurate data. So definitely going to check that out throughout the weekend, or getting closer to the weekend. There we go. And so that's it. I appreciate you guys watching. I hope everybody has a safe and have a good day.